Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin. Thanks so much for joining me. It was a landmark agreement, one of the cornerstones of the post-Cold War era. More than 30 years after Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed the historic nuclear arms pact known as the INF, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Trump administration has now officially and formally withdrawn from it. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making the announcement this morning, accusing Russia in his announcement of long being in violation of the agreement, saying in the announcement this, quote, Russia is solely responsible for the treaty's demise. So what does this now mean for the world, for the president's relationship with Vladimir Putin? We're going to get to that in a moment. But there is more. President Trump has also now hit Moscow with new sanctions for the attack last year on a former Russian spy. You might remember Sergei Skripal and his daughter. They were poisoned in the UK. Russian agents are accused of using a banned nerve agent in that attack. The Kremlin, maybe not surprisingly, has denied it. With all of this happening, we now find out that the president spoke with Vladimir Putin on a call this week. So did they hash this all out? Here's Trump's readout of the call.
I spoke with President Putin of Russia yesterday. They're having massive fires in their forests. They have tremendous, I've never seen anything like it. It's very big. I just offered our assistance because we're very good at putting out forest fires, frankly.
CNN's Jeremy Diamond is at the White House. He's joining me now. Jeremy, what are you hearing from there about all of this today?
Well, Kate, the U.S. today has officially withdrawn from that treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, also known as the INF. And now senior administration officials are already telling us that the U.S. could be just weeks away from its first test of a cruise missile that was previously banned under this treaty. The treaty prohibited the testing and deployment of certain intermediate range ground-based cruise and ballistic missiles, and it was viewed as really a key deterrent between the United States and Russia and formerly the Soviet Union, a key deterrent to nuclear war. Now there is a risk of heightened tensions as a result of this, but this comes, of course, after years of the United States warning Russia that it was violating this treaty. Even the Obama administration previously accused Russia of violating the treaty and sought to bring it back into compliance. Today's withdrawal comes 6 months after the Trump administration gave Russia an ultimatum to get back into compliance with the treaty or that the United States would indeed withdraw, and that has now happened. But this is not the only issue happening right now on the front between the United States and Russia. The United States also yesterday imposing new sanctions at Russia over the poisoning of that former Russian spy, Sergei Skripal, in a nerve agent attack that took place in the United Kingdom. And all of this comes right after the United States, President Trump and President Putin spoke on Wednesday over the phone. Questions about whether or not they discuss any of these matters that the President of the United States was preparing to impose, both this new round of sanctions over the Skripal poisoning as well as this withdrawal from the INF treaty. The White House, in its readout of this statement, and the President in his comments, suggested that he was merely calling about these forest fires that are taking place in Siberia, as well as trade issues. The White House so far has not responded to our request, asking if anything else was discussed, in particular these latest tensions between the U.S. and Russia. Kate?
Jeremy, let us know if that changes. Great to see you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Joining me right now is CNN Global Affairs analyst and senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, Max Boot. It's great to see you, Max. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about the treaty. What is the significance of getting out of this treaty? I mean, from your because I hear, let me just read for our viewers a statement that came from the UN Secretary General about this. The world will lose an invaluable break on nuclear war. This will likely heighten, not reduce, the threat posed by ballistic missiles. I mean, do you think this necessarily leads to an arms race now?
I don't think that's the case, Kate. I think the INF Treaty is actually in a lot of ways outdated because it does not cover China. China is building a lot of intermediate missiles, and that's a lot of the threat that the U.S. is responding to. And Russia has been cheating on the treaty. There's no question this is not, fake intelligence made up by Trump. This was something the Obama administration said. So I'm generally pretty critical of the Trump administration. But in this case, I think they have a reasonable case for getting out of this treaty. The real question is, why aren't they doing more to confront Russia in other areas, particularly on election interference?
Yeah, I mean, do you think in any way this could be an effective, I don't know the better other way to say it other than like a scare tactic to get them back to the table, to get them somehow back in compliance with the whole parameter of what the whole point of this agreement was about?
That may be the case, or maybe the U.S. just wants to in the limits because we want to respond to the Chinese intermediate missile buildup. But again, I don't think this is the major issue between the U.S. and Russia right now, because nobody really thinks that the Russians are going to attack us with missiles. The way that they're attacking us, as we know, is by undermining the integrity of our election system.
But it is somewhat. It's such a juxtaposition, if you will, right? You have confronting aggression with pulling out, making a bold statement on, we're not going to let you go anymore in this lane. We're going to put sanctions on you for this attack. And then silence, relative silence, as you say, on another front. What is the effect of all of that together?
Well, it's incoherent, Kate, as the Trump administration's policy is on many areas. It's incoherence times 10 in the case of Russia, because they've done a few tough things, and you can see pulling out of this INF treaty is a tough thing. They imposed some more sanctions on Russia because of the Skripal case. But again, very limited, ineffectual sanctions, really, with a congressional gun to their head, because this was mandated by legislation, which they've been ignoring for a year. But then yesterday, real outrage, you had Donald Trump saying that he doesn't believe the Russians are still attacking us, which is something that Robert Mueller testified to before Congress. So, this is kind of like they're barring the third floor window, but they're leaving the front door wide open, because this is the number one way the Russians are attacking us. And Trump seems determined to ignore this threat. And you have to wonder if he's hoping once again in 2020 to benefit from Russian interference in the way that he did in 2016.
It's such an important way of putting it, actually. Maybe it's small, maybe it's big, but I'm just curious on your take on this call then between Trump and Vladimir Putin. They say it was only about wildfires, and I do not want to diminish the severity of the wildfires that they're facing, because it is truly a horrific tragedy that's been going on for months. But do you think it is credible that they wouldn't maybe, I don't know, what's your take? That they wouldn't discuss the INF treaty at minimum, because this deadline has been looming for a long time?
It's not credible. I mean, maybe Donald Trump gave his advice on raking the forest to Vladimir Putin, which is the advice that he gave to California
California
officials.
is supposed to do, that's right.
But you can't take at face value anything this administration says about Russia, because of their record of mendacity and the way that Trump has tried to conceal his dealings with Putin, even going so far as to confiscate a translator's notes. As usual with this phone call, we found out about it because the Russians told us about it, not because the White House did. And of course, remember, the White House has a way of putting out these cover stories about when the Trump campaign was meeting with a Russian envoy offering dirt on Hillary Clinton. It was supposedly about adoptions. This phone call was supposedly about forest fires. In fact, my surmise, I mean, we don't know, but my surmise would be the timing of this, the fact that it happened the day before Trump imposed these very limited and ineffectual sanctions. My surmise would be that he was probably telling Putin, hey, Vlad, don't worry about it. This is not really going to hurt you. I have to do this. Congress is forcing my hand, but I want to have a great relationship, yada, yada, yada. That would be my guess. But we don't know. And
this is one of those things we only get that. We only get that readout from the call.
Right. That's a surmise. And you can't trust the White House readouts. And just the record of lying and concealing just leads to greater suspicions. And we still, despite the Mueller investigation, we still don't know the full story of Donald Trump's links with Russia. We don't know what's happened with the counterintelligence investigation, which Mueller told us is still ongoing.
I do think, though, you make a really important point. With this news comes a very important reminder of not losing sight of ongoing interference and ongoing threat coming from Russia right now, that folks need to continue to keep their eye on the prize on that, even if many would say the barn door is wide open on it still. Great to see you. Thanks so much, Max. I really appreciate it. So this isn't the only international crisis that President Trump is facing this morning. China is now threatening to retaliate after President Trump announced yesterday a new escalation in his ongoing trade war with Beijing, a 10% tariff on $300 billion worth of Chinese imports. That's on top, of course, of the 25% tariff already in place on $250 billion worth of Chinese products. Here's what the president had to say about it yesterday.
When my people came home, they said, we're talking. We have another meeting in early September. I said, that's fine. But in the meantime, until such time as there's a deal, we'll be taxing them.
So in effect, next month, there's going to be a tax on all Chinese goods coming to the United States, from tech to toys to shoes. The president, of course, continues to claim without any factual basis that this all is being paid for by China. Reports from his own administration contradict that claim. So what will the real impact be? Joining me right now is Neil Irwin. He's a senior economic correspondent for the New York Times. Neil, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kate.
So this is around, I honestly feel like it's God knows what when it comes to China on this trade war. I mean, what is the impact of this latest, the 10% tariff on $300 billion?
I think the key thing to know is that these things aren't individual, they're cumulative. So it's not just the 10% on $300 billion, that's $30 billion if you just do the simple math. We're in a $20 trillion economy. But this comes on top of, as you say, taxes on the existing 25% tariffs on $250 billion, tariffs on steel and aluminum, trade tensions with Europe, Japan, Mexico. And all of that's creating a real damper on business. If you're in any kind of manufacturing industry, any kind of U.S. exporter, you have retaliation and you're dealing with higher costs for your goods that you import. And we're seeing that in the numbers. We're seeing that in jobs numbers. We're seeing that in what corporate earnings reports. Well,
and let's talk about that, more of the impact. I mean, the Fed chair said this week that in announcing the cut in interest rate, it was responding to global trade tension. And then the president makes this move a day later. I wonder what now? Does this erase all the breathing room that the Fed was trying to give the U.S. economy?
Yeah, I think we have this weird circularity that's happening where essentially the trade wars slow the economy, slow the world economy. The Fed reacts by lowering rates. That gets things back on track. That helps boost the stock market. And then Trump's getting what he wants. He's getting a booming stock market. He's getting Fed rate cuts. And so now rinse and repeat. We're doing it again. I don't know how that ends. It's a very strange kind of odd scenario where these things impact each other that normally don't have much to do with each other.
And that uncertainty is what everyone's on the same ride here, just waiting to see how this really turns out. I mean, the president, in the middle of all of this, continues to try and spin this as a win for consumers. I want to play once again what he said just yesterday about this. Listen.
We're taking in many billions of dollars. There's been absolutely no inflation. And frankly, it hasn't cost our consumer anything. It costs China.
You study this closer than most. Does his claim get any more true the longer he repeats it?
I'd say it's kind of the opposite. The previous rounds of tariffs have been mainly on what are called intermediate goods, meaning things that other businesses buy and use in their production processes. Expanding to this $300 billion round of tariffs on China, assuming it goes into effect, that is capturing more consumer goods. So things like furniture, things like consumer goods you might buy at the store. So that's going to show up in either higher prices for those goods or companies having to source elsewhere, which raises their costs, which also results in higher prices. We don't know how much, we don't know at what pace, but if this keeps expanding and keeps escalating, there's no way it doesn't start to pinch Americans' wallets at some point.
Yeah, and the deal, there's no agreement in the offing. They're still talking, but the agreement, there's no idea of when exactly an agreement could be coming to end all of this. It's great to see you, Neil. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your reporting.
Thanks, Kate.
Still ahead for us, the only black Republican in the House of Representatives. He just announced that he's calling it quits, and it comes just weeks after Congressman Will Hurd had declared that he is the face of the future of his party. What changed? The Republican Party has a personnel problem on its hands. Texas Congressman Will Hurd, the lone black Republican in the House of Representatives, just announced that he will not be seeking re-election. His retirement was anything but expected. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, he was telling CNN's Christiane Amanpour that he was the face of the future of the party.
Look, I'm the only black Republican in the House of Representatives. I go into communities that most Republicans don't show up in order to take a conservative message. Now we say if the Republican Party in Texas doesn't start looking like Texas, there won't be a Republican Party in Texas. And I think that goes for the rest of the country. Well, I like to say I'm the face of the future Republican Party.
But that's not all. Hurd is now the 9th Republican to announce that he's going to be out. It's been something of a Republican exodus in just the last week plus. Before Hurd, Mike Conaway announced that he's retiring on Wednesday. Utah's Rob Bishop announced the same Monday. Then Alabama's Martha Roby announced. Pete Olson of Texas last Thursday. Paul Mitchell of Michigan one day before that. That's just the past couple weeks. By comparison, only 2 Democrats have announced retirement, and it's not just the number. It's who's retiring and why that deserve attention. Here now to discuss, former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent and former Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez, both CNN political commentators. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Congressman Dent, let me start with you. Are you surprised by Hurd's announcement? What do you make of it?
I'm not surprised, but this is devastating for Republicans. Will Hurd is one of 3 House Republicans who represents a district that Hillary Clinton won in 2016, Brian Fitzpatrick and John Katko being the others. And I'll tell you, if the Republicans have any hope at all of picking up some seats in this 2020 election, they're going to need people like Will Hurd, because that seat is now gone. They need to pick up 17 or 18 seats. Well, guess what? The task just got harder, much harder. You also have Pete Olson. His seat is at great risk for Republicans. And a guy like Mike Conaway, who announced the other day, his seat's going to go Republican, but he's a very thoughtful, measured member, very respected. He's going to be replaced by some guy wearing a MAGA hat, probably. That's what's going to happen. So this is really very bad news for Republicans. Susan Brooks' seat, they're going to have to spend money on that one. Paul Mitchell. So this is devastating. There's no good news, and Will's a great friend. It's a 71% Hispanic seat. I'm sure he's very frustrated, having to answer questions, when the president attacks people of color. And then, here he is, an African-American Republican in a 71% Hispanic district. This must just really grate on him personally to have to respond to this.
You know that personally, because having to answer for the president on things that he says and does is something that you and I have talked about a lot since you announced your retirement, and being part of your decision on how frustrating and exhausting it can be for members when some members, surprisingly, shockingly, would like to focus on legislating and policy. I mean, Congressman Gutierrez, his retiring, or Hurd's retirement, means now that Senator Tim Scott will be the only black Republican in the entire Congress. And my friends at Politico also smartly pointed this out this morning, and it really caught my eye. There are now more Republican members of the House named Jim than there are women Republicans running for re-election. You're not in the business of giving Republicans advice, but how do you spin that?
Look, this is part of the whiting and the shrinking of the Republican Party, and it really looms disastrous for them in the future. Yes, he was a Republican, he was black, he was also young. I think he's 41 years old. And so, in political terms, he's in his adolescence, right? He has a whole life ahead of him. And I hope he finds another way to show public service. And look, it demonstrates something under Donald Trump, right? How do people like Will Hurd survive? Now, he was the lone black Republican. We know that Mia Love, who works with us now as a commentator, right, was the first black woman Republican elected to the Congress of the United States. Gone. And I believe in great measure because Donald Trump is president of the United States. And if you don't agree with me, just listen to Donald Trump after she lost. What did he say? I'm going to help you get back the next time. He said, you didn't show me enough love. You didn't like me enough, right? You didn't support me enough. That's why you went down. No, President Trump, you're destroying your own party and you're reducing your own party. And that's why I think the future looks so well. Here's the other thing is that they have a problem with minorities, but they also have a problem with women. So how is it that you build a coalition into the future so that you have a national presence as a party? Look, bipartisanship in the United States of America,
I want to ask you about bipartisanship
rewarded.
in just a second, Congressman Gutierrez, because that's actually also a problem now facing Democrats with this personnel problem on the right. Congressman Dent, when you take this in combination with how many Republican retirements there were in 2018, who can stop the bleeding? I mean, what do you think the future fix is here for your party?
The future fix for the party is to become a party that is going to become more inclusive. We have to make the party more welcoming to people. It's just not a club. Politics is an exercise of inclusion, not exclusion, addition, not subtraction. And unfortunately, during the Trump era, the party has really just doubled down on its base, playing to the shrillest elements of that base and really not trying to find ways to expand. As Luis just said, I mean, losing Mia Love and Carlos Curbelo in the last election, I thought was also devastating. And it's not just that they lost, but then the way the president treated them. Mia Love didn't show me enough love. Carlos Curbelo, he didn't warm up to me enough. I mean, these were two of the most articulate voices for Republicans who were people of color, and they're gone, and the president ridiculed them. So the bottom line is, unless the party is going to start making serious outreaches to those in the Hispanic and the Asian communities and the African American communities, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. We just simply can't double down on guys who look like me.
And Congressman Gutierrez, Will Hurd is a conservative. I mean, he's also, though, someone who would speak out against the president, would stand up to things that the president said, and at times would buck the party and vote on a bipartisan way and vote with Democrats. And so I do wonder, when you talk about bipartisanship, what does this mean, this kind of shift that's happening with these retirements? What does it mean for Democrats when lawmakers like this are the ones leaving more and more?
Well, first of all, I want to say and agree with my colleague, my former colleague, the seat is going to go Democrat. You and I can come back and review this tape, Kate, after the November election of 2020. But look, bipartisanship is something that is celebrated, right? And everybody applauds it, but it's seldom rewarded. And under Donald Trump, he's made it just impossible. I remember a few short years ago being in Chicago with Speaker Ryan, right? Talking about comprehensive immigration reform and working with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Because in the end, big things, right? Real big things like immigration reform and healthcare, you're really going to have to reach across the other side of the aisle if you're going to make them possible. But it's seldom rewarded, unfortunately. And what I have to say is, look, Will Hurd took a trip. Remember the trip he took with Beto O'Rourke? 1,600 miles. They missed their plane. They tried. They tried to work together, but Donald Trump is making it impossible because in the end, yes, he was a Republican. Yes, he was a conservative, but he was also a black man. And he made it impossible for him to be able to get reelected in a black man, a Republican, winning in a supermajority Hispanic district, right? You would think the party would want to promote and help and solidify his position. They did everything they could, especially the president, to undercut because he's thoughtful, because he's careful, right? Because he's a patriot. And you can disagree with people like Will Hurd, but you cannot disagree with their sense of patriotism and their sense of commitment to making America a better place for all of us to live.
One thing we do know, we have heard from Will Hurd, is that he is looking forward to running at some point, again, for another elected office. Let us see when that is, what that office is. We have not heard the last from Will Hurd, but it's great to have you guys here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, guys. All right, we are getting some breaking news that was just handed to me just coming in. An NYPD official is announcing her recommendation for the officer involved in the death of Eric Garner. Let me get over right now to Shimon Prokupecz. He's got the very latest on this. Shimon, what are you hearing?
Yeah, so this is big news here, certainly for the Garner family. This is something that they've been waiting to hear for really 5 years when you think about it. And word now, we're told by officials, is that the NYPD judge who oversaw the internal hearing for the police officer, Daniel Pantaleo, after a 6-day trial, has recommended that he be terminated, that the police commissioner fire Daniel Pantaleo. And that is really the next step here. What will the police commissioner do? Will he fire the officer after these recommendations from the NYPD department trial? This judge, she's a deputy commissioner, Rosemary Maldonado. She oversaw this 6-day trial. Her testimony saw evidence and now has recommended that the officer be terminated, be fired from the police department. It is up to the police commissioner now, and I think that's what is very important for folks to understand, what the ultimate outcome here is. And from what I'm told is that the NYPD commissioner, James O'Neill, is expected to follow her recommendations. When that will happen is unclear. It is expected that he's going to move pretty swiftly here, so we could hear something within the next 10 days. But there's a process here now for the officer involved. His attorneys, they get to sort of appeal. They can appeal this decision to the police commissioner. They can submit briefs. They can argue to him why it is that the officer should not be terminated. And one other point here for the officer, and that is his pension. Will he be allowed to keep his pension? If the police commissioner terminates him, the police commissioner can decide to also take away his pension. That is a severe consequence as well in all of this, and it's not hasn't been done often, but it is done in some cases, and that would be the ultimate punishment here as well for these officers. So if in the end the police commissioner decides to fire him, he would lose his job, obviously, but then he could also lose his pension. But all of this is still up in the air, and we should have word probably in the next 10 days. But I think this will be a huge relief here for the Garner family and for folks who have been seeking justice in this case.
And as you have pointed out many a time, this isn't just about something that happened in New York. This is a death and a case that captured the nation, outraged so many. His final words, "I can't breathe," became a rallying cry for those about brutal police tactics. And now this, 5 years later, this is why it's getting so much attention and deserves it. Shimon, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. We'll be right back. Remember all the talk on the Democratic debate stage this week about not using Republican talking points? It looks, though, like Democrats may have, when they were on the debate stage, given Republicans some new talking points at the very same time. Look no further than President Trump last night.
And the Democrats spent more time attacking Barack Obama than they did attacking me, practically.
It was already one of the most surprising twists of the Democratic debate. Democrats taking on the policies of the former Democratic president, and one who enjoys a favorability rating of 95% among Democrats. Then last night at the rally in Cincinnati, President Trump added his voice ridiculing the 2020 Democrats for their Obama attacks. What is the real impact of this? And will voters see more or less of this now? Joining me now is Paul Begala, CNN political commentator, former advisor to President Clinton. Good to see you, Paul.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for having me.
You did not like what you heard on that debate stage one bit, as I have seen in the last 24 hours. Is it, though, because you think the beloved former president of your party should be off limits, or is it something else?
No, he's not infallible, but he was a darn good president. He was a terrific president, and he's beloved by Democrats. It is odd to me, if you're running the Democratic Party, why you would distance yourself from the record of a beloved Democratic president. We saw Al Gore try to do that in 2000 when he was running to succeed the beloved Bill Clinton. Didn't work for Gore. Not going to work for these folks. They would do much better to talk about how to build on that legacy rather than tearing it down.
Let me read you what some of the candidates post-debate, after they've really been pushed on this, have said as kind of their response. Cory Booker has called it on the debate stage an honest conversation about an administration that was incredible. Kamala Harris told reporters in Detroit yesterday she has nothing but praise for President Obama. Kirsten Gillibrand said just last night that Obama was a great president and that they were trying to figure out how to build on Obama's accomplishments. Does that make it better for you when you hear maybe that's what they're trying to say about it now, when you know what happened on the debate stage?
Well, yes, it just means they're paying their cable bill and they're listening to me. Seriously, they get it. I mean, these are very, very smart people and terrifically accomplished people. But then you get into the specifics. Okay, Obama was a great president. Some of them are saying, for example, that the Obama deportations are somehow similar to President Trump's immigration policies, which is crazy. And I'm looking for a Democrat to say, some people need to be deported. President Obama deported people who were guilty of crimes, violent crimes, felonies. That's where the target should be.
But he did earn the infamous name amongst activists, deporter-in-chief.
That's right, he did, because he was deporting large numbers of people, but those people had committed crimes. Now, some had lied on their applications, which is also a crime, but a whole lot of them were very recent arrivals who had committed serious crimes. And that's a debate you should have. Right, and instead of that, they're just saying, well, we should not have a law that makes it a criminal offense to cross the border. That's not going to sell.
But then, help me out with this. Explain to me how then any of Biden's opponents can effectively, because that's how this all came about, right? Any of Biden's opponents can effectively take on Joe Biden, whose resume includes being Obama's vice president, without taking on his time being vice president.
That's a fair point, and you have to be careful about it. Take some art. These are brilliant people on the debate stage. I watched them. Also, it turns out, and I know this because I'm a trained professional, Joe Biden has a record long before he joined the Obama administration. He voted for the war against 1812. Okay, he's been in the
Joe Biden
Senate.
though says none of that. His opposition, his vote for the War of 1812 should be under consideration because it lacks context now.
The truth is he's got a long record, and I think quite a good record. I don't have a favorite in this race, but there's lots that you can do. The fundamental question for Democrats is what those candidates you were saying before were saying. Should you want to build on the Obama record. I think that's the way to do it. Or do you want to tear it down? Okay, Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana, I thought had one of the great lines in the debate when he said, now you guys want to repeal and replace Obamacare. You know, some Democrats, the more moderates, want to build on it. Biden and Bullock and Buttigieg and some others. Others, Senator Warren, Senator Sanders, want to completely eliminate the Affordable Care Act and replace it with a comprehensive Medicare for all system. That's an honest debate to have within the party.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let debate continue. But there's no debating. You're a wonderful man. Unless you're on Twitter, and then you're making fun of me. It's good to see you, Paul. Thanks so much. Get off the stage now. Still to come for us, still to come right now, about President Trump's pick to be the next director of national intelligence. And it's not about his time in Congress. It's about his resume. Details ahead. Democrats are gearing up for yet another confirmation fight. This time it's President Trump's pick to be the next director of national intelligence, Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe. Since his nomination, there have been questions raised about whether Ratcliffe has the experience to oversee the nation's intelligence agencies. Then there were his critics who believed his nomination was nothing more than a reward for his loyalty to the president. And now, new reports the Texas Republican may have exaggerated his resume as a federal prosecutor. Joining me now is a former U.S. attorney and contributing columnist to the Washington Post, Harry Lippman, who's been digging deep into Ratcliffe's record. Harry, thanks for being here.
Hi, Kate. Good to be here.
Thank you. You say there are two reasons, you wrote about this, there are two reasons that the Senate should reject Ratcliffe. First being that what you see as his political loyalty to the president. But for this discussion, more importantly, you've taken a deep dive into his resume and this statement from his congressional website. It says, when it's talking about his bio, quote, as a U.S. attorney and federal terrorism prosecutor, Ratcliffe put terrorists in prison. And you have some serious questions about that. Explain.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really seem to hold up, and there are others as well. Just quickly on the partisan point, partisans are fine in some areas of government, but it's the last place you want them. It's the director of national intelligence. On this resume sort of confabulation, he said he put terrorists in jail, referring to a prosecution that it turns out he wasn't in his district, and he had hardly any role in. The attorneys on the case don't even know him, but he took full credit for it. And now just this morning there's a new report. He says he put 300 illegal immigrants in jail. Turns out that's grossly exaggerated at best. There were 45 people put in jail. It was a 5-office operation. So he's really stretched things to the breaking point. And of course, it also adds up to his not having much experience where you need it. So, you know, it's quite a trifecta, being a partisan, confabulating his resume, and not really having the actual experience for the job.
Now, here, you know, when CNN's Alex Marquardt, my colleagues, Alex Marquardt and Evan Perez, they asked Ratcliffe's office about these questions, and Ratcliffe's office offered up this statement, not really directly answering. And let me read that for our viewers. Department of Justice records will confirm that as both Chief of Anti-Terrorism and National Security for the Eastern District of Texas from 2004 to 2008, John Ratcliffe opened, managed, and supervised numerous domestic and international terrorism-related cases. CNN's initial search of court records does not find any terrorism cases that he was listed as prosecuting. What do you make of their statement there after the research you've done?
Yeah, so I can decode that as a former U.S. attorney. First of all, it doesn't speak at all to the specific lies, I think would be the right word, about the cases he's touting on his website. But he was in this role in the office for a couple years where anything having anything to do with terrorism would officially kind of come by his desk and maybe get the T on it. Of course, in East Texas, it's not a hotbed of terrorism. And whatever there is seems not at all to have been what we think of for a director of national intelligence, but kind of, you know, little incidents that in which maybe there's some kind of radical thinking by a local citizen or whatever. So I think it's going to turn out to be a shred of truth to it, but really that shred kind of puts the bigger lie to it. There's no hands-on experience of the sorts of cases that he's touting he's actually handled and that the director of national intelligence has to really understand.
Yeah, it looks like more questions are mounting rather than less, and this will be a really interesting confirmation process for a very important post, the Director of National Intelligence. Harry, thanks so much.
Right. I mean, this is the #1 post to tell the truth.
Thanks so much, Harry. I really appreciate it. Still ahead for us. New jobs report is out, and it is good news for President Trump. But how will his new threats of even more tariffs on China impact the U.S. economy now? More on that right after this.